Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology. And this time, I wanted to share with you my horoscope forecast for May 2025. On May 2nd, Venus conjoins Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, this is a rather peculiar and sensational planetary conjunction that's taking place between Neptune and Venus. Neptune is a planet that glamorizes whatever zodiac sign it's passing through. In other words, whatever themes or elements that we associate with a particular sign suddenly become glamorized. They suddenly reach a sort of mythic proportion to them. So when Neptune is passing through a zodiac sign like Aries, a sign that's famous for its rugged individualism and breaking the rules and doing what it thinks it's right, then this is the sort of thing that permeates the atmosphere that we all live in. We may see it in our cultural expressions, we may see it in news items, we may even experience it in conversations and our day-to-day activities. This idea of, I'm going to follow my own truth, and that's the only truth I believe in. This all of a sudden becomes very popular and very infectious in a way when Neptune is traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries. When you combine that with Venus, you get a very fascinating combination of the two planetary energies. Venus we're used to as describing relationships in astrology. Venus often is used to describe what we find attractive or what we find appealing. But in the work that I've done over the decades that I've been practicing astrology, I have found that Venus really is a planet that's connected to the law of attraction. In other words, Venus is an energy that attracts people into our lives according to where it's placed in an astrological chart. Now, Venus in the zodiac sign of Aries is having a little bit of difficulty being Venus. Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, and so what Venus naturally wants to do is pair people off. It wants to bring people together. It wants to bring people into your life who like the same things that you do, who hate the same politicians that you do, and laugh at the same jokes. So Venus is very much about geniality. It's very much about harmony. It's very much about being comfortable with the people that you are surrounded by in your life. Venus works on the principle of like likes like. But when Venus is traveling through the astrological sign of Aries, she is said to be in her detriment. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that there are certain zodiac signs in which Venus feels very at home. There are certain zodiac signs where Venus feels celebrated. There are certain zodiac signs where Venus feels like she's really working against the current and it's really hard for her to exercise her Venusian abilities. And there are certain zodiac signs where Venus just doesn't flourish. She just doesn't feel comfortable. And maybe even where she acts in a way that's opposite from the way that she normally behaves. Venus, as I mentioned, was named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. She's also known for being associated to peace and harmony. But when Venus is traveling through a zodiac sign like Aries, which is Mars ruled, Venus has a hard time harmonizing. Venus has a hard time bringing people together in a peaceful and lovely manner. In fact, what happens to Venus when she's traveling through a zodiac sign like Aries is what I call the telenovela Venus. All right, she can't help but attract attention which is not positive, but rather negative and maybe even controversial. She describes situations that you find yourself in which no matter what your good intentions are, things are turning out dreadfully. They're not showing you in your best light. Let's think of a classic example. Let's say you're over at a friend's house and you've attended a dinner party and it's your best friend's house, okay? Let's say you've attended a dinner party at your best friend's house, and everyone sat there over the meal and they've had wonderful conversation. You've maybe even met a couple of people you didn't know before. And this being your best friend's house, you've happily volunteered to help clear the table and clean the dishes. And so you're in the kitchen and you're cleaning the dishes and things like this. And your best best friend's husband comes into the kitchen, and you have a nice conversation with him. You've known him for a long time, but all of a sudden he professes that he's in love with you, that he's attracted to you, that you're the only reason why he married your best friend in the first place. Okay, so suddenly you find yourself in this situation in which your world has been transformed. It's been turned inside out, upside down. You're getting unwanted attention. This is not the way it should be. And you're about to say, well, hey, wait, Larry, what's going on here? Me and Velma have been buddies for years. How can you do this to her? And Larry all of a sudden lunges forward and says, it's you that I love. It's you that I want. And that's, of course, the moment when your best friend Velma and the other guests enter the kitchen to find you in the embrace of Larry, who's desperately trying to kiss you, and you caught completely unawares and saying, Larry, stop. Okay, this is what I've seen happen many times in different versions with Venus traveling through a zodiac sign like Aries. It brings unwanted attention. People get the wrong idea. They sort of like make a move. And, you find yourself in this completely awkward position, if not maybe something a little bit more dire, where you don't want to be here at all. And it causes all kinds of drama because Aries is a fire sign, and fire signs, wherever Venus goes in a fire sign, even if it's Leo or Sagittarius, there's going to be drama. So when I was thinking of how to describe Neptune and Venus and Aries and how they would go together, something that came to mind was a film that I saw. I think it was released back in 1991 or 1992, and that movie was called Thelma and Louise. I always try to think of stories or myths or movies or something that go along with the planetary energies that I wanted to describe. And Thelma and Louise is an excellent example of Venus conjunct Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries. This is a story in which we have two women, Thelma and Louise. Gina Davis plays Thelma, and Susan Sarandon plays Louise, and they're friends in Arkansas. And they've been friends for a number of years, and they've decided one time, like maybe it's late spring or summer, that they're going to go have a ladies' weekend fishing or something along those lines. That Thelma's husband is a carpet salesman and he's always trying to land the next gig, and he's very dominating and a bit of a bore. And Louise, she's not married. She has a boyfriend who's a musician and he's always on the road and always away and just not really there. And so the two of them have decided, we're going to go out, fishing for the weekend and have some time and just catch up and have ladies' weekend or something along those lines. And so they travel to go fishing, and Louise packs a gun because they're two women traveling alone. And in case there's trouble, she wants to make sure that they're protected. And on their way to fishing for the weekend, they decide to hang out at a bar or something like that. And they're partying and drinking and, having a fun time. They're letting down their hair. And Thelma, who is sort of a meek housewife, again, she's dominated by her husband, she starts dancing with this guy, and the guy's being flirty. And, she hasn't really been in the arms of a man who's really shown her this kind of attention in a long time. And it's a bar and they're playing along, they're having a fun time. And so they go outside into the parking lot, and the guy immediately tries to assault her. This is an example of unwanted attention. Like, she went from, I thought we were just, having fun or whatever, and now he's accosting her. Louise, noticing that her friend has been gone a while, goes out in the parking lot and she finds them. And Louise pulls a gun. She pulls the gun that she brought for protection, and she tells the guy to knock it off and to move away from her friend Thelma. Thelma, of course, is completely distressed and disturbed and embarrassed and frightened, and all these sorts of emotions that are running through at the same time. She composes herself and puts herself together. And Louise is holding that gun. She's like, okay, now we're going to leave. And she probably says something insulting to the guy. And the guy gets insulted. He's already feeling insulted because a woman pulled a gun on him and all this sort of stuff. And he's also kind of got this attitude of like, oh, didn't you want it? And so he's feeling affronted. And so what happens is that Louise shoots him dead on the spot. She has this triggered moment. And we find out a little bit later in the film that she references herself having been in a situation that was very similar to the one that Thelma was in. And we can sort of guess that it didn't turn out the way that it did with Thelma. No one came to Louise's rescue, but Louise doesn't really talk about it, but she certainly acts upon it. And of course, that starts off the plot of the film, which is two fugitives from justice, two women on the run who don't know what to do, and they suddenly find their world transformed from what was a typical day-to-day world. These were two women who weren't especially, outstanding in any sort of way. Louise is a smart-talking waitress, and Thelma's a housewife dominated by her carpet-selling husband. And so all of a sudden they're on the run. And there's a woman hunt that's going on where the FBI are drawn in, and they're chasing these women from Arkansas through the Midwestern states and even out west. Now, this movie in 1991-92 was an instant hit, okay? And it was even iconographic. It was like an icon. There are films that can be hits and films that can be famous, but then when you add a sort of Neptunian energy to it, something which is famous or remarkable can sort of take on icon status, okay? And what I mean by icon status is that it touches a chord in society. It touches a chord in culture in which people respond to this and say, I can really relate to this, or I went through something like this. A recent example of that would be Me Too, the Me Too movement, in which a simple hashtag all of a sudden creates an entire cultural moment, and this is what a planet like Neptune can do. Now, as we watch this film, and I think you can sort of recognize the elements of Venus and Neptune and Aries there. It's two women who are on the run as a result of unwanted attention. And what Louise has done is absolutely criminal. And the fact that they're flipping out and they're on the run now. But as an audience, you find yourself rooting for the women, as this is going on. Your first reaction isn't like, arrest her, arrest Susan Sarandon immediately. It's more kind of like, yeah, he was a real creep or whatever. And, give it to him and go, Thelma and Louise, drive faster, evade the law and outsmart these self-absorbed men. You really find yourself there. And it was one of those moments in the early 90s that kind of divided men from women, because on one hand, women were like, yeah, sister's packing heat, give it to him. And guys were kind of like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with what's going on in the movie. And why is my date or my sister or my friend really getting into this? And I'm feeling like you're going to pull a gun on me. So it was one of those moments. It was described as a very feminist moment and very angry. But that's not that's not, in my opinion, a real true depiction of what was going on. Yes, it was absolutely affirmative of women, but it was coming out of a real outrage, a real anger. At the time that it was made, rape kits, for instance, went untested. They would gather in the back of police closets or storage rooms or wherever they were kept. And women, when they said that they were raped, weren't really believed. In fact, the attitude was kind of like, well, you asked for it, or look at what you're wearing, and this sort of a thing. And again, these are themes that are very Venus in Aries. Okay, you're attracting the wrong kind of attention. And not only that, but it's getting you into trouble and it's putting you in these very dramatic circumstances. Why shouldn't women wear whatever they want to wear? Why shouldn't that just be an understanding? Guys get to wear pretty much whatever they want to wear. So why shouldn't the same thing apply to women? And this was what this film is sort of encapsulated is, by it being done in the sort of buddy film type of thing, two guys on the run, like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid or something like that, who defy the law. Well, what was okay for the guys to do is suddenly not okay for the women to do. And so it really revealed this extraordinary double standard. And you're sort of rooting for, people who have done something bad, but they've done something bad that is good because something should have been done about this a long time ago. All right. So where it really also comes in with Aries is, again, this cultural moment that we're in with Neptune and Aries, which is, I break the rules that I don't like. If I don't like this rule, I can break it, and everyone's like, yeah, break that rule. Show them who's boss. Show them who's tough. something that's often associated with male energy. But when a woman does it, it's like, hey, that's not okay, type of thing. And this is something that, came out in that moment. And that's why the movie really comes to mind when I talk about Venus conjunct Neptune in Aries, because we have an iconic moment. We have this theme that has flooded the banks and come out into society, and that has created a situation where people are on different sides of it, and it's not even one side or the other. People have very different responses, very visceral responses, and so it becomes a sort of powerful defining moment. Now, I'm not saying that, the first thing that's going to happen to you in the month of May is that you're going to find yourself in a situation in which you're suddenly a fugitive from justice and running from the law. And so you have to drive to the Grand Canyon with your bestie and drive your car off, and come to this end or something like that. That is how the movie ends. The two women are cornered by the police, and rather than give themselves up, and there's like police and helicopters and things like this, rather than give themselves up, they are in this car and they decide to drive the car off the cliff of the Grand Canyon, and they go, flying into the air. And then that's when the screen goes blank. And so again, that speaks to the fiery need for freedom, that not only, does the rule not apply to me, but, I'm going to die free. I'm going to live free. And these are themes which were in the film that deal very much with Aries. And again, I'm not saying that you're going to be thrown into these impossibly dramatic circumstances, but you may recognize the theme in your own life. Whenever we're dealing with the modern planets like Uranus or Neptune or Pluto, because of their slow-moving nature, they're not always associated with events or circumstances. And in some regards, we can even apply that rule to different planetary transits as well. But with the slower moving planets, they really it's almost like they release into the atmosphere these themes or these ideas, that move people's souls and fill people's minds, particularly Neptune. Neptune, really more than the other two, Uranus and Pluto, is very much about that. So I'm not saying that, again, you're going to find yourself on the lam or anything like that, but you could find yourself in a predicament not of your own making, okay? You could find yourself in a situation, whether you're female or male, whether you're drawing unwanted attention from someone, it puts you in some kind of predicament and you react. And again, you're not like shooting the person in the parking lot or anything like that, but maybe you react and this affects your status in your home, or this affects your status at work, or this affects your status in your community. And it may set up a kind of dilemma, that I was defending myself or I was protecting myself, or I never wanted this interest. And so I'm reacting, and people's response are like, well, we're siding against you, or you shouldn't have made a big deal of it, or you shouldn't have been in the kitchen with Larry alone in the first place. Or, we're almost like people are blaming you for the situation. And you could find yourself in a similar situation like that, where it's very hypocritical and there's a double standard that's being applied to you, and you're on the wrong side of it, and where you may find yourself having to choose whether you're going to accept the mantle of being a victim or whether you're going to be defiant. Signs most affected are Aries, Leo, Libra, and Sagittarius. On May 4th, there will be a first quarter moon in the zodiac sign of Leo. It's hard to wait your turn, especially when there's a first quarter moon in a zodiac sign like Leo. Now, a first quarter moon is the period in the lunar cycle in which the moon is gaining in light. It's called a waxing moon. So the moon has moved out of a new moon period, which is the start or the beginning, and it's moved into that part of its lunar phase where it is gathering light, where it is becoming more of a light in the heavens. Basically, anything from a crescent moon or a half moon in the sky is pretty much a first quarter moon. It's a pretty familiar symbol. And so when we have that taking place in a fire sign like Leo, as I said, it's hard to wait your turn. It shows you chomping at the bit. Now, you've been on good behavior for longer than you care to admit, applauding the successes of those who don't totally deserve it and smiling graciously as people who were standing behind you in line move to the front. Nevertheless, during this period of time when you're like, oh, it's my turn now, it's a better idea for you to bide your time. In other words, being patient and biding your time is well advised. Now, it's annoying to watch people who don't deserve it move ahead rather than yourself, but nevertheless, biding your time right now is well advised. The reason for it is because you're playing the long game and have strategically positioned yourself for the next step up. So in the moment, let everyone crow about their sensational breakthroughs and their one-hit wonders, because your aim is to reach the top. And when you do reach the top, to stay there. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, and Leo. Another planetary aspect taking place on May 4th is Pluto, turning retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Pluto retrogrades are like that moment at the end of a Godzilla movie. It's the moment when Godzilla, after having gone on this rampage of destruction and taking out what's ever left of Tokyo, decides to turn his back on the people. He's going to stomp his rampage and he's going to turn his back on the people and he's going to return to the sea from whence he came. And the citizens of Japan all breathe a collective sigh of relief, like we may be feeling on this day when Pluto turns retrograde in Aquarius, because it's like, oh, we won out, we persevered. Godzilla is now turning back and going back into the ocean. And we can have a similar feeling when Pluto turns retrograde in the sky, that we've overcome this primal force with our collective ingenuity, courage, and resourcefulness. But the truth is that Pluto just decided to go underground again, like cicadas after they've swarmed, or a volcano that has stopped erupting. A modern planet is never as strong as when it first enters a zodiac sign. Now, Pluto has entered Aquarius twice. One was at the beginning of 2024, and the second time was at the end of 2024. And so it's now firmly in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. It's not going to retrograde back down into Capricorn anymore. It's spending all of its time in Aquarius. And so during this period of time when Pluto was going in and out of Aquarius, this is when it was exercising its power most ferociously, so to speak. Now, Aquarius is a zodiac sign that's very much focused on society. All three air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, have to do with relationships. And you can sort of see the progression of the idea of relationship by going through those three air signs in their zodiacal order. Gemini rules over sibling relationships, which are the first relationships you experience as a child. And if you didn't have a sibling, then there was probably a relative, like a cousin, or there was a playmate, someone who was your peer, someone who was on the same level as you. And these are the relationships that Gemini symbolizes. The second air sign is Libra, and Libra symbolizes partnerships. Okay, relationships that are not with people that are in your vicinity, relationships with people who are from outside your family. And Libra, which is the sign of the scales, famously symbolizes marriage as well as business partnerships. When we get to Aquarius, we get to the idea of society, okay, and that's the person within society. All right, so Aquarians have this principle, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. In other words, living in a society where other people's interests are as important as your own is something that you are continually trying to work out and coordinate in life, all right? And so when we have Pluto enter a zodiac sign like Aquarius, we have this idea of a society being transformed through some kind of ordeal, through some kind of difficulty, some sort of cathartic change, because Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. Now, indeed, the last time that we had this kind of social transformation take place on the level that Pluto introduced at the end of 2024 was during the pandemic. And that was a period of time when it wasn't Pluto, but it was Saturn that was moving through the zodiac sign of Aquarius. So you can almost think of Saturn as Pluto's kid brother. And so when Saturn was traveling through Aquarius, it very much changed the makeup of society and left us with an experience of, whew, glad we're on the other side of that. Now, with Pluto moving through Aquarius, Pluto picks up where Saturn left off. No sooner had we recovered in hopes of rebuilding the society or sense of social community that we had lost during the pandemic, then we go through Pluto, which really exposes the floorboards, which really exposes what's underneath society. And so the questions, the dilemmas, and the unflattering truths that Pluto has laid bare since it entered the zodiac sign of Aquarius, these are like open secrets. These are like open wounds. These are like open controversies. In other words, everything that had been subtext before, think of a volcano, everything that had been, contained lava before, has come to the surface and has bubbled up to the surface and rolled down the mountain and changed the surrounding environment around that volcano. And so there's been that kind of volcanic transformation since Pluto entered Aquarius at the end of 2024. Society before the end of 2024 does not resemble society right now. All right. So like I was saying before, this is the moment in the Godzilla movie in which Godzilla has turned around and heading back to the ocean. And we're like, yay, and goodbye, Godzilla, and good riddance, Godzilla, and whatever. But we still have to face what the repercussions are of what has taken place. So on one end, you can sort of consider yourself, I don't know, Godzilla free for the next 5 months, because Godzilla has returned to the ocean. And so there is a slowing down of these social transformations that we have been experiencing, a moment for breath to collect ourselves and to really sort of see where we are right now. But we also have to remember that whatever planet has gone into retrograde is going to eventually come out of retrograde. And indeed, Pluto will come out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aquarius on October 13th. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On May 5th, Mercury forms a sextile to Jupiter. Mercury in Aries is more of a doer than it is a builder, but its sextile to Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Gemini today may prevail upon you to switch mental caps. Not only does this sextile encourage you to broaden your horizons, but the fact that Mercury rules Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Gemini means that Jupiterian energy is on tap for you. So, don't be surprised if you're asked to take on a floundering project or to turn around an underperforming department at work. It may seem beyond your ability to do, but if you approach this problem with the mindset of a student rather than someone who's got to have all the answers, then this could turn out to be an enormously educational and enlightening experience for you. Not only will you discover that you really can build things from the ground up, but you'll be introduced to talents you never thought you had. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, and Sagittarius. On May 6th, Venus forms a sextile to Pluto. At first, you weren't convinced that a certain alliance or partnership would work. And truth to tell, you're still not exactly sold on it. You've been through so many about faces, broken promises, and abrupt departures to ever assume that anyone is here to stay. And it's probably because of that you're willing to give this association a chance. It's no skin off your nose. Besides, the plus side to repeat disappointment is that it inures you to heartbreak. Other zodiac signs often turn to cynicism when their hopes are dashed, but the nature of fire and air energy, which appears in your horoscope as a result of the sextile between the Venus in Aries and the Pluto in Aquarius, is to rise again. You know that you'll keep on going, even if others don't. In fact, if anything, it's their job to keep up with you. And maybe, just maybe, this time they will. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. On May 10th, Mercury enters the zodiac sign of Taurus. You will need to see tangible results, and by day's end, during the time that Mercury is traveling through earthy Taurus, and that will be from May 10th until May 25th. There will be no more doing things on spec or gratis. You mean business. Results don't have to be substantial to be substantive. They just have to be there. Your insistence on having something to show for your efforts may strike people as demanding and even a bit hard-nosed. But there's no denying that this bottom-line thinking of yours will be responsible for your material success, especially on May 16th, May 21st, and May 24th. Mercury will be in Taurus until May 25th when it enters the zodiac sign of Gemini. And after that, it's a whole new ballgame. Signs most affected are Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, and Capricorn. On May 12th, there will be a full moon in the zodiac sign of Scorpio. It's hard for you to stay out of people's private affairs, especially when it's someone you care about, when there is a full moon in the zodiac sign of Scorpio. You can tell when something's off, and once you get wind of it, you can be like a bloodhound tracking a scent. You're compulsive about getting to the bottom of things, and you won't quit until you do. However, this relentless pursuit of the truth could get you in trouble with a loved one if you're not careful. Now, it doesn't matter if you think you've got the answer to their problems. What's important is that you back off and respect their personal boundaries and trust that if they need help, they'll ask for it. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Another planetary aspect taking place on May 12th is Mercury forming a square to Pluto. Today's Mercury-Pluto square takes place at a sensitive angle of your solar horoscope. Now, it may feel like everyone is against you and that you haven't a friend in the world. But the real question you should be asking yourself is, are people really out to get you? Or are they trying to tell you something that you don't want to hear? Now, there are times when we must be true to ourselves and persevere, no matter what. And there are times when others see the way ahead more clearly than we do, and it would be a good idea to listen to them. Today, with Pluto in such an entrenched position, this might be one of those times. Signs most affected are Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On May 17th, the Sun conjoins Uranus for the last time in the zodiac sign of Taurus. Wow, it's hard to believe that this is the last time that the Sun will form a conjunction to Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, in the zodiac sign of Taurus for the next 84 years. Now, Uranus first conjoined the Sun on April of 2019. And since 2019, people born under the zodiac sign of Taurus have been experiencing wild breakthroughs or breakdowns on a regular yearly basis. Uranus is the planet of revolution and change, and when it enters a sign, it upsets the established order of the sign. So if Taurus, for instance, is a sign that's very much concerned with stability and security, guess what's been upset on a regular yearly basis since 2019? And today is the last time that they're going to come together here. Now, some of you might be like, thank heavens, you might be people who've been pulled out of the ocean who immediately throw themselves down on ground and kiss it and say, at last, dry land, all right? And there is indeed reason to celebrate, all right? But at the same time, what you might want to do is reflect on how much has changed during this period of time of annual conjunctions between the Sun and Uranus in Taurus since 2019. Now, Uranus, The reason Uranus is associated with being the planet of revolution and change is because Uranus is kind of the odd man out in our solar system. It is the only planet that orbits the sun rotating on its side. All right. So, in other words, where Uranus's north and south poles are where everybody's else's equators are. So Uranus orbits the sun rotating on its side, and with the rings that surround it, often looks like a wheel in the sky that keeps on turning, literally. So with Uranus, you want to think of a wheel. A good example of this is the Wheel of Fortune. One day you're on top and everything's going wonderfully, and another day you're on the bottom and everything is going abysmally. Now, at any point, you can rise up from the bottom back to the top, just like you could go from the top back to the bottom. So this idea of what's up goes down and what's down comes back up is very much an idea or a principle that's associated with the planet of Uranus, hence the sense of instability and insecurity when it's been traveling through the zodiac sign of Taurus. But revolution, which we associate to rebellion and overthrowing a government, is also the word that is used to describe a planet completing one single orbit around the sun. So what also happens when Uranus conjoins the sun for the last time in a zodiac sign is that we can feel like we've somehow wound up where we began. For instance, Donald Trump was president of the United States of America in 2019 when the sun formed its first conjunction to Uranus and Taurus. And Donald Trump is president of the United States in 2025 when the sun is forming its last conjunction to Uranus in the zodiac sign of Taurus. Now, Uranus is famous for kicking over the structures of your life. As I said, it's the planet of instability that has been traveling through the zodiac sign of stability and security. But something that I want you to think of as an image for this time, as a symbol of this time, it's not an astrological image, but it's actually an image from the Tarot. In the Tarot, there is a card which is called the Lightning Struck Tower. And what you see on this card is a tower with lightning coming out of nowhere and striking it, and people tumbling out and falling towards the rocks and the crashing waves underneath. Now, the tower was a fascinating symbol back in the Middle Ages. The tower was the corner of a fortress, and so the fortress of the castle is where the elite lived, and outside the fortress of the castle is where the peasants lived and worked. Now, let's say there was a marauding army or there was a threat and people were coming and they were going to take over this castle or steal away all the goods that the peasants had harvested. Now, what the peasants would do during the first sign of trouble is that they would run to the castle and they would shelter in place, okay? So a tower was seen as a place of protection, where you go when you're in trouble if there's a marauding army that's shown up from out of nowhere. But a tower was also where the peasants were incarcerated when they didn't pay their taxes on time, or when they didn't obey the Lord, or when they didn't do what they were told. So the tower, which could symbolize shelter and protection, could, at the same time, also be a prison where people disappeared to and were never heard from again. So when we see this lightning-struck tower, this tower has been struck by lightning and it's crumbling and it's falling apart, this to me is a really good image to keep in mind of Uranus forming the last conjunction to the sun in the zodiac sign of Taurus, because what it really talks about is the collapse of a long-standing structure. All right. And so this can be a feeling of all of those things that I relied upon, all of those things that I turned to are collapsing in my life. And this is a horrible thing. This is a disaster. This is catastrophic. What am I going to do? And what can happen on the other side of this collapse is a feeling of just being exposed and not having anything that you can rely on and feel secure about anymore. But what can also happen with the collapse of something that we've relied on for perhaps too long in our lives, whether it was a structure, a form of security, a way of living and being, what can also happen with the collapse of something that felt so permanent is that we can feel liberated. We can feel free. Maybe it had become a prison over time. Maybe it had begun to curb our personality and to define who we are. So the question that we have at this time, when the Sun conjoins Uranus for the last time in Taurus, is, do you want to go back and rebuild what came before, or do you want to move forward and try something different? Signs most affected are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On May 18th, Mercury forms a square to Mars. A lot of things are going to be said that you wished had remained unsaid when Mercury forms a square to Mars today. Now, one could say that it's good to voice resentments and air grievances, that everyone does a lot better when they say what's on their mind. But things are rarely that altruistic when these two planets lock horns. That's because Mars has no problem fighting dirty, and Mercury will weaponize the closest word, handy. Yet it's not the fight that's at fault, but the means being used to win it. Nobody ever wants to acknowledge that their intent was to inflict pain, that they were using private confidences and tender moments as ammunition. But the sooner you cop to your part in it, the sooner the other party will cop to their part as well. There's nothing pleasant about these sorts of altercations, yet if they can serve as a deterrent against ever doing anything like this again, then that means that something constructive has come of it. Signs most affected are Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Leo, Virgo, and Scorpio. On May 20th, the Sun forms a sextile to Saturn. There's something to be said for a strict deadline and being told to work only with what you have that makes us inventive. And that's the genius of the sextile taking place today between the Sun in Taurus and Saturn in Pisces. You may resent the restrictions imposed on you and the pressure being applied to you, but there's also no disputing that you'll be more creative and get more done than you would have if you had been given all the time and money in the world. Saturn may be a harsh taskmaster, but the work you put into yourself is always rewarding when it forms a sextile to the Sun. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, Leo, and Capricorn. Another planetary aspect taking place on May 20th is the last quarter moon in Aquarius. It's rare when you have two last quarter moons in the same sign in the same span of 4 weeks. There was a last quarter moon at 1 degrees Aquarius on April 20th, and then there's another last quarter moon, but this time at 29 degrees Aquarius today on May 20th. This creates a parentheses and/or brackets, a unique and peculiar episode where something ended and then ends again. You can kind of think of it as 2 goodbyes in a row. This might be based on going back to work for a company because maybe they needed you, and you thought, okay, maybe this time it will work out between me and them. And then you realized as you went back to work for this company that the problems were the same ones that they always were, and you wind up resigning or quitting again. Or maybe you meet someone who reminds you of your ex, and despite your best attempts to make a go of things, your budding relationship just can't get past the fact that even though this is a different person, it still feels like it's the same relationship. Sometimes we have to go back in order to move forward. And sometimes the only way to resolve something is to experience a repeat pattern, because repeat patterns don't always ensnare us in a loop. Repeat patterns, by definition of their repetition, can also bring, gradually over a period of time, recognition and realization. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On May 22nd, Venus in Aries forms a trine to Mars in the zodiac sign of Leo. This is especially wonderful for fire signs everywhere. Venus-Mars trines are famous for romantic pairings, and it looks like you've met your match, and in a good way. Now, the difficulty with fiery people when it comes to romantic relationships is that they often pair with people who somehow wind up bringing them down. If a fire sign pairs with water, water has a tendency to dampen their fervor. If a fire sign pairs with an earth sign, earth has a tendency to corral them into a holding pen. And even air, which is an element that fire sextiles, even air signs don't always really appreciate the freedom that a fire sign craves. They'll take freedom weekends where they go off and have an adventure with you, only to return to their lives on Monday and their specially curated schedules. It's said that with fire signs, that when two fire signs get together, and the fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, it's said that with fire signs, when they get together, they will always burn out. And that might be true, but it's the experience. And that's the word that's such an important word for a fire sign, experience. It's the experience that always winds up being worth it. It's hard to tell what the future will bring for a relationship or partnership or association that's coming together today, but what's certain is that for now, you will enjoy every moment of it. Signs most affected are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The other planetary aspect, taking place on May 22nd, is the Sun forming a sextile to Neptune, followed by the Sun forming a trine to Pluto. Now, technically, these two planetary aspects are taking place on separate days. The Sun will sextile Neptune on May 22nd, and then it will form a trine to Pluto on May 24th. But when taken together, these are extraordinary planetary aspects, which is why I want to read them together. They will expand your influence and increase your clout, as long as you read people right. Or in other words, as long as you're able to read the room. Now, you may find yourself surrounded these days by people who have these amazing, these sensational ideas, but either they don't know what to do with them, or they haven't the foggiest notion of how to implement them. The Sun sextile Neptune on May 22nd increases your intuitive ability to recognize the potential in what people are saying. And the Sun-Pluto trine on May 24th shows you how to shape these concepts into a full-fledged plan. But you have to work with people and not overrule them. This will require a lot of listening, being a sounding board, and even some ego massaging along the way. Do this, and not only will you tap into a storehouse of fresh approaches and creative twists, but you'll also build support for doing the things you want to do, and in ways that you would never have been able to do them before. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. On May 24th, Saturn enters the zodiac sign of Aries. Saturn changing signs always introduces obstacles that are both burdensome and time-consuming. Suddenly, you'll feel like you've got a red light, while everyone else has a green one. Delayed starts are always the bane to your existence when Saturn is in Aries. That's because Saturn is in fall, in the zodiac sign of the spring equinox, which means that your biggest fear is things being over before they've begun. And if you take yourself out of the running, then that's exactly what will happen. The solution is to choose your races wisely. Know that you aren't built for speed as long as Saturn is in Aries. So skip the sprints and sign on for the marathons. Because Saturn in Aries will give you the endurance, the stamina, and the ability to pour it on when the finish line's in sight. It's true that Saturn in Aries may cause you to stumble at the starting gate, but it always delivers in the end. Signs most affected are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. On May 25th, Mercury enters the zodiac sign of Gemini. Mercury in Gemini is famous for rearranging the furniture every 3 months. People with this placement of their natal birth chart often do it because they're restless, bored, or simply want a new look. Other zodiac signs aren't nearly so capricious. However, it might not be the worst idea when it comes to your daily agenda. Mercury in Gemini is the perfect time to reprioritize, rework, and reconfigure. You'll find that it gives you a fresh outlook on things. You might also want to make more time for romance while you're at it, because it looks like your love life has been collecting dust bunnies from weeks of neglect. Signs most affected are Gemini, Virgo, Libra, and Aquarius. Another planetary aspect taking place on May 25th is Mercury forming a sextile to Saturn. Logic and intuition combine forces to help you make sense of the disparate pieces spread before you. Now you know that what you're looking at are the elements to a successful plan, venture, or project, but they aren't really coming together in the way that you expect. That's because you're trying to force a fit. Today's Mercury-Saturn sextile invites you to break the mold and to think outside cookie-cutter concepts. Relax the mental muscles. Be open to inspiration in the moment, and you will see an intelligible pattern emerge on its own. All you have to do is write down each step as dictated by the stars. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Virgo, and Aquarius. On May 26th, Mercury forms a sextile to Neptune. What's the difference between fantasy and visualization? Fantasy is about conjuring up images and scenarios of what could be. It's not too concerned about making them happen. It's more yearning in nature and even escapist. Visualization, however, directs the power of the imagination towards a goal. It's one thing to have an aim or objective in mind, quite another to imagine yourself achieving it. And this doesn't have to be focused on a specific outcome. You can visualize something more open-ended, like a loving relationship, a fulfilling career, or a way of being. Now remember that Neptune is not a to-do list-friendly planet. Unfettered imaginations are rarely concerned with the means and methods of making a dream come true. Brought together through the creative collaboration of a sextile, you'll see both Mercury and Neptune pool their talents and resources to help you find a way to create the life you envision for yourself. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Another aspect taking place on May 26th is the new moon in Gemini. Now, this is an interesting time because it's a time when people will be sharing their personal stories with you. But this isn't about them confiding in you, and they're not divulging a secret that they want for you to keep. What it is about recognizing wise words for living when you hear them. So what's going on here with the new moon in Gemini is that it's almost like your unconscious is in conversation with another person's unconscious. So it's not like they're sitting down to teach you a life lesson or something like that. It's more like they're sharing with you a memory, something that happened recently, and you recognize in that something that's very profound and something that's very telling. I guess the best way to think of conversations that you're having today is along the lines of an Aesop's fable. Each anecdote that you hear carries a moral to the tale that, if you can only tease out its meaning, will prove to be both enlightening and applicable. This is a wonderful way to embrace the conversations that you'll be having today, because what you will have at the end of them will be lessons to live by. Signs most affected are Gemini, Cancer, Libra, and Aquarius. On May 27th, Mercury forms a trine to Pluto. You're on a fact-finding mission that nobody can dissuade you from when Mercury forms a trine to Pluto in the sky. Like a detective whose curiosity has been piqued, you won't be satisfied until you get to the bottom of what bedevils you. This is wonderful for researchers, collectors, and journalists, because not only will you follow the trail wherever it leads, but Pluto is likely to share its secrets, allowing you to unearth connections that were hard to prove and expose past histories that were buried or forgotten. The thing to watch out for, however, is the effect that this might have on your friendships and associations. Pluto, named after the lord of the underworld, is famous for revealing information that was best left alone. This total transparency, espoused by air signs, doesn't always take into account why information was hidden in the first place, and this is something that you could find yourself struggling with this week. Signs most affected are Gemini, Libra, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On May 30th, the Sun forms a conjunction to Mercury in Gemini. You'll feel alert and on top of your game now that Mercury, planet of the mind, is Cazimi. Cazimi refers to the heart of the Sun, and it's said that any planet traveling this close to the Sun makes the leap from an exhausted and weakened state to a robust and raring-to-go one. You can think of it as your mental faculties coming back online after having spent days searching for a signal. Now, the Cazimi only lasts one day, so you're going to have to act fast. Mercury Cazimi is the perfect time to bluff your way out of a corner, to meet with that person that everyone said you couldn't see, or to take the most calculated of risks. Aim high and shoot far, because the unique combination of audacity, savvy, and timing ensures that you will be successful. Signs most affected are Gemini, Leo, Virgo, Libra, and Aquarius. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.